The crystalline towers of Sentinel Prime Academy rose like frozen flames against the violet sky, their surfaces catching the light of three distant suns and scattering it across courtyards where the galaxy's future military leaders gathered. Zara moved through these spaces with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem her intellect couldn't solve. Her translucent skin refracted light in calculated patterns, a biological trait her species had refined over millennia to communicate complex tactical concepts without speech. Behind her walked Vorin, whose neural architecture processed battlefield mathematics at speeds that made conventional computers seem primitive. The morning held the comfortable rhythm of academic superiority. Students from 14 different worlds congregated in small groups, their conversations flowing in 20 languages, but centering on one persistent theme: the inferiority of human military doctrine. The subject had become something of an academy-wide joke, a shared understanding among species who had mastered the elegant mathematics of modern warfare that humanity remained trapped in barbaric thinking. Professor David Turner stood before the amphitheater's entrance, watching the students filter past him with barely concealed contempt. At 53, he carried the weathered appearance of someone who had seen actual combat, not just simulated it in academic exercises. His grey hair and the scars on his hands told stories these students weren't ready to hear. His uniform bore decorations from conflicts in star systems whose names would mean nothing to these privileged minds. Campaigns erased from official records for reasons the council deemed necessary. Inside the amphitheater, Zara claimed her usual seat near the front, surrounded by peers who shared her intellectual certainty. The day's lecture concerned pre-contact human warfare, specifically the siege tactics employed during Earth's Bronze Age. The syllabus listed it as mandatory study, though most students considered it a waste of time that could be better spent analyzing advanced strategic systems from more developed civilizations. "I still don't understand why we study this primitive garbage," Vorin muttered, his compound eyes scanning through digital notes that catalogued every tactical error humanity had committed in the past 5 centuries. The human limitation accord exists because Terrans proved incapable of adapting to modern combat doctrine. We should focus on successful military traditions, not failed ones. Zara nodded, her refracted light patterns showing agreement. She had spent the previous semester preparing a comprehensive thesis titled "The Psychological Deficiencies That Exclude Humanity from Contemporary Warfare." The paper had received preliminary acclaim from 3 different department heads, all of whom praised her thorough documentation of human tactical inadequacy. The Academy's official position on humanity was clear and universally accepted. 50 years ago, following humanity's chaotic entry into galactic civilization through a series of badly managed first contact incidents, the Council had implemented strict protocols limiting Terran involvement in military operations. Humans could serve as advisors and scouts, nothing more. The decision had been framed as necessary protection, though protection for whom remained deliberately ambiguous in official documentation. Most students interpreted the limitation accord as evidence of human incompetence. Zara certainly did. Her research had uncovered hundreds of examples where human commanders made decisions that violated basic strategic principles. They prioritized emotional factors over mathematical optimization. They pursued victory conditions that ignored survival probabilities. They structured their entire military philosophy around concepts that made no logical sense to species who had evolved past such primitive thinking. Professor Turner entered the amphitheater, and the noise level dropped, though whispered mockery continued in several languages. He activated the holographic display without preamble, showing ancient Earth fortifications and siege equipment that looked laughably crude compared to modern weapons systems. "Today we examine the siege of Carthage," Turner said, his voice carrying none of the apologetic tone most human instructors adopted when teaching their species history. Note the resource management decisions made by both attacking and defending forces. Zara raised her hand without waiting for acknowledgement. "Professor, with all due respect, What educational value exists in studying tactics that were obsolete 3,000 years before humanity achieved spaceflight? These methods have no application to contemporary warfare. That assessment assumes contemporary warfare represents the only form of conflict humanity might face, Turner replied. History suggests otherwise. History suggests humanity cannot adapt to the warfare we currently face, Vorin interjected. The limitation accord proves this. Your own council deemed your species too volatile and unpredictable for modern combat operations. Turner's expression didn't change. The accord proves something, certainly, though perhaps not what you believe. Before Zara could formulate a response, the amphitheater's main entrance opened and Dean Cordax entered, his 6 arms moving in patterns that indicated official business. The Valerian administrator's blue-gray skin had the texture of ancient stone, and his large black eyes missed nothing as they swept across the gathered students. Professor Turner, Cordax said, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones of his species' complex vocal structure. A moment, please. Turner stepped away from the holographic display, conferring quietly with the dean while students speculated about the interruption. Zara watched the exchange with interest, noting the tension in Turner's posture and the unusual urgency in Cordax's gesture patterns. When Turner returned to the front of the amphitheater, he deactivated the siege display and replaced it with a simple text announcement. Special presentation. Sector 7, Auditorium. 1400 hours, attendance mandatory for advanced strategy students. What you're about to see, Turner said carefully, will require you to reconsider certain assumptions about human capabilities. I recommend you prepare yourselves mentally. The cryptic warning only increased student speculation. Zara found herself intrigued despite her skepticism. As the morning classes concluded, she gathered with other advanced students to discuss the afternoon's mysterious presentation. Probably more footage of human tactical failures, suggested Trell, a student whose species had evolved in zero-gravity environments and considered themselves the galaxy's premier void combat specialists. Perhaps they're finally admitting their methodology doesn't work. But Zara noticed something in Turner's demeanor that suggested otherwise. The professor had shown none of the defensive embarrassment most human instructors displayed when discussing their species' military record. Instead, he had exhibited something closer to grim resignation, as if he were a doctor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. By 1400 hours, Sector 7's main auditorium was filled to capacity. Word of the mandatory presentation had spread throughout the academy, and even students not technically required to attend had crowded into available spaces. The massive display screen at the front remained dark, though technical staff had spent the previous hour running diagnostics on systems that seemed far more sophisticated than necessary for a standard academic presentation. Dr. Helen Carter stood at the podium, her hands visibly trembling as she connected a sealed data core to the auditorium's main systems. As humanity's senior liaison to the Academy, Carter had spent 7 years working to integrate human personnel into galactic military education. The task had proven frustrating, sometimes humiliating, as she watched alien students dismiss human achievement with casual contempt. Now she was about to change everything those students believed, and the responsibility weighed on her like physical pressure. Before we begin, Carter announced, her voice amplified across the crowded space, I must establish context. What you're about to witness is classified combat footage, declassified specifically for this presentation by Council authority. It documents actual military operations conducted 50 years ago during humanity's early participation in galactic defensive operations. Zara leaned forward with interest. Actual footage might prove more valuable than the sanitized reports he had studied for her thesis. Direct visual evidence of human tactical inadequacy would strengthen her arguments considerably. The operation in question, Carter continued, involved a standard evacuation mission on the colony world of Hadrian 6. A civilian population faced imminent attack from a Vakari swarm force. A human unit was assigned to provide rear guard protection during the evacuation. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Every species in the galaxy knew about the Vakari. The insectoid swarm race had consumed 4 entire star systems before mysteriously vanishing from known space 50 years ago. Most historians assumed they had migrated to another galaxy or been destroyed by internal conflict. The human force numbered 200 soldiers, Carter said, her voice growing quieter. The approaching Vakari swarm numbered approximately 50,000 warriors. The murmurs turned to confused whispers. Those numbers violated every principle of military mathematics these students had learned. 50,000 against 200 suggested not a rear guard action, but a massacre. Even the most optimistic tactical models predicted complete human annihilation within minutes. I must warn you, Carter said, that this footage contains disturbing content. It will challenge fundamental assumptions you hold about warfare, about humanity, and about the nature of the limitation accord. She looked toward the back of the auditorium where Turner stood in shadow, his face unreadable. He nodded once, a gesture so subtle most students missed it. Carter activated the display. The screen filled with an image of a human military compound under an amber sky. The timestamp indicated the footage was exactly 50 years, 4 months, and 16 days old. Captain Lisa Brooks appeared in frame. A woman in her mid-30s with blonde hair tied back and eyes that held the exhausted determination of someone who had already accepted an inevitable outcome. She was speaking with her second-in-command, Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, a stocky man with dark hair and numerous visible scars. The audio quality was excellent, capturing every word with crystal clarity. Evacuation transports are loading families from the outer settlements, Brooks said, studying a tactical display that showed civilian positions and approach vectors. Orbital surveillance gives us maybe 6 hours before Vakari scouts reach the perimeter. Rodriguez checked his equipment with practiced efficiency. 6 hours should be enough for a fighting withdrawal. We can buy the transport's time to clear the gravity well. Brooks was silent for a moment, then shook her head. New orders from Orbital Command. Vakari main force is moving faster than predicted. Transports need 8 hours minimum for complete evacuation. The alien students watched as human soldiers received this information. Any rational military force would recognize the mathematics immediately. 8 hours versus 6 hours meant mission failure, meant the logical choice was immediate withdrawal to save whatever lives could be saved. Attempting to hold against such odds violated every principle of strategic thinking. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly, 50,000 Vakari against our unit. We can't hold for 8 hours. We probably can't hold for 8 minutes. You're right, Brooks agreed. We can't hold, so we're not going to hold. We're going to attack. Zara felt her light patterns shift involuntarily, expressing confusion. Vorin's enhanced neural processor struggled to parse the logic behind such a decision. Around the auditorium, students exchanged glances of disbelief. On screen, Brooks gathered her soldiers and explained the plan with clinical precision. They would not establish defensive positions. They would not conduct a fighting retreat. Instead, they would use themselves as bait to draw the entire Vakari swarm into predetermined kill zones where concentrated firepower could maximize casualties. The plan required every soldier to understand that survival was not merely unlikely, but actively counterproductive to mission success. Living humans in defensive positions would be ignored by the swarm, which would flow around them to reach the civilian targets beyond. But wounded, dying humans screaming in pain would attract Vakari attention like blood in water, drawing them into carefully orchestrated traps. They're planning to use themselves as bait, Trell whispered, his voice carrying undertones of horror. They're planning to die deliberately to lure the enemy into ambush positions. The footage continued. Human soldiers prepared weapons that seemed specifically designed to penetrate Vakari armor. Though the insectoid race had never been successfully engaged before this encounter, they planted explosive charges in patterns that made no sense according to conventional defensive doctrine, but would create devastating overlapping kill zones if enemies approached from predicted directions. Most disturbing was watching the soldiers themselves prepare. They weren't frightened or resigned. Several were smiling, making dark jokes about acceptable casualty ratios and optimal wounding positions. They discussed which injuries would generate the most screaming, which body parts could be sacrificed while maintaining combat effectiveness, which soldiers had voices that carried farthest when expressing agony. "This is madness," Zara said aloud, her voice cutting through the auditorium's horrified silence. "No rational species behaves this way. No sane commander gives such orders." Turner stepped forward from the shadows. "You're absolutely correct. By any conventional definition of military rationality, what you're witnessing is collective insanity. The question you need to ask is whether conventional rationality applies to all tactical situations." On screen, the first Vakari scouts appeared on the horizon. Massive insectoid shapes moving with terrible speed, each one the size of a small building with claws that could shear through reinforced metal. They had annihilated 4 star systems using tactics that no species had successfully countered. Brooks stood calmly in the center of the human formation, watching the approaching nightmare through her tactical display. "Squad 7, advance to position Alpha. Make yourselves visible." 12 human soldiers ran forward into an exposed position where thousands of Vakari could see them clearly. The insectoid warriors immediately altered course, their primitive neural patterns identifying easy prey. "They're going to be slaughtered," someone in the auditorium said, though their voice sounded uncertain now rather than confident. Squad 7 held position as the Vakari charged toward them. At the last possible second, Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with perfect calm. "Execute." The ground around Squad 7 erupted. Hidden charges detonated in calculated sequence, the explosions timed to create a cascade effect that channeled force into a concentrated killing field. Over 2,000 Vakari died in less than 10 seconds. Squad 7 died with them, buried in the flames they had ignited. The auditorium fell completely silent. Students stared at the screen trying to process what they had witnessed. Brooks' voice came through the audio, emotionless and precise. "Squad 7 eliminated. Enemy casualties approximately 2,000. Exchange ratio acceptable. Squad 3 moved to position Bravo." "Acceptable," Vorin repeated, his vocal processor struggling with the concept. 12 deaths for 2,000 kills is acceptable." The footage continued its nightmare progression. Squad 3, 15 soldiers, positioned themselves to draw Vakari attention toward prepared killing zones. But instead of using explosives, they used something more terrible: themselves. They engaged the swarm in deliberate combat, fighting with brutal efficiency not to win, but to wound themselves in specific ways. Soldiers took claw strikes to non-vital areas, generating screams that attracted thousands more Vakari toward positions where hidden weapons platforms could engage them. The alien students watched human soldiers fight while wounded, fight while dying, fight while using their own blood and pain as tactical assets. Medical stations that should have provided treatment were actually weapons platforms disguised as places of healing, drawing Vakari into concentrated fire zones. "They're weaponizing their own suffering," Zara said, and she could hear the tremor in her own voice. "They're turning agony into ammunition." Brooks moved through the battlefield, coordinating the slaughter with mechanical precision, stepping over her own dead and dying soldiers without pause, focused entirely on maximizing enemy casualties. When she gave orders, they contained phrases like optimal wounding duration and acceptable pain thresholds and maximum auditory attraction. The Vakari kept coming, drawn by sounds of suffering that violated their instinctive hunting patterns. They had evolved to hunt prey that fled, prey that hid, prey that died quickly. They had never encountered prey that used its own death as a weapon. 30,000 Vakari died in the first 2 hours. The human force was reduced to 73 soldiers, most wounded, all determined. "Final phase," Brooks announced to her remaining troops. Her uniform was torn and bloody, one arm hanging useless, but her voice remained steady. "We don't need to survive this. We only need to complete the mission." What followed broke every rule of warfare the students had learned. Brooks personally led a direct assault into the center of the remaining Vakari swarm, not trying to break through or capture ground, but simply to reach the swarm's queen with a biological weapon that would destroy the entire command structure. The camera followed her progress through thousands of enemies. Vakari claws tore through her armor, opened deep wounds across her body, shattered bones and severed muscles. Any rational being would have collapsed, would have died, would have given up. Brooks kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept crawling when she could no longer walk. She reached the queen, a massive creature twice the size of the warrior caste. The queen's claws pierced through Brooks' chest, lifting her off the ground in what should have been a killing blow. Brooks smiled, blood running from her mouth, and activated the weapon she had carried through the entire battle. The queen convulsed and died. Within seconds, every Vakari on Hadrian 6 collapsed as the biological weapon spread through their hive mind network. 50,000 warriors died in less than a minute. Brooks died watching them fall, still smiling. The footage ended with the final casualty report displayed in cold text. Human losses: 197 killed, 3 critically wounded. Vakari survivors 0. Mission status complete success. Civilian casualties 0. The auditorium remained silent for a full minute after the screen went dark. Then, slowly, the implications began to sink into minds that had spent years studying warfare as a mathematical exercise, as an intellectual puzzle to be solved through superior processing power and tactical optimization. Zara stood up, her light patterns flickering in ways that expressed horror and confusion and something approaching fear. Why would any species fight that way? Why would anyone give such orders, accept such orders, execute such orders? Turner walked to the front of the auditorium, his weathered face showing no satisfaction at the students' shock, only a deep weariness. Because sometimes that's what victory requires. You asked why the human limitation accord exists. Now you know. The Council didn't restrict us because we're incompetent at warfare. They restricted us because we're too competent in ways that other species can't understand or control. But the cost, Vorin said, his enhanced brain trying desperately to process the mathematics of what he had witnessed. A 98% casualty rate. No rational cost-benefit analysis justifies such losses. You're right, Turner agreed. No rational analysis justifies it. That's why human military doctrine doesn't rely entirely on rational analysis. We understand that some situations require transcending rationality, require accepting costs that logic says are unacceptable. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her face pale but determined. There's something else you need to understand. The operation you just witnessed took place 50 years ago. Human military capabilities have advanced considerably since then. The tactics you saw are considered outdated by current Terran standards. The temperature in the auditorium seemed to drop. Students looked at each other, trying to imagine warfare more effective than what they had just witnessed, and failing completely. Outdated, Trell repeated, the word sounding hollow. You're saying humans have developed methods even more extreme than what we just saw? Carter nodded slowly. The Vakari were an extinction-level threat to galactic civilization. If they hadn't been stopped at Hadrian 6, they would have continued consuming worlds until nothing remained. 200 human soldiers eliminated that threat completely, not delayed it, not contained it, eliminated it. The Vakari exist nowhere in the galaxy now because of what those soldiers did. Dean Kordax stood and addressed the assembled students, his multiple arms gesturing in patterns that indicated profound importance. I summoned you here today because a petition was submitted requesting removal of human military studies from our curriculum. The petition argued that human doctrine is primitive and worthless, that studying it degrades our education. He paused, his large eyes sweeping across hundreds of students who now understood they had been catastrophically wrong. Having seen this footage, does anyone still support that position? No one spoke. Zara looked down at a data pad where her thesis document waited for final revisions. Every word she had written now seemed not just incorrect, but dangerously naive. She had catalogued human tactical inadequacy without understanding what human tactics actually accomplished. The footage shows one thing clearly, Kordax continued. Humans have weaponized concepts that other species cannot comprehend. Tactical sacrifice, victory through self-destruction, combat operations where success is measured not by survival, but by mission completion, regardless of cost. These are not primitive tactics. They are tactics so advanced, so alien to conventional military thinking, that they appear primitive to those who don't understand them. Turner spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of experience these students lacked. Every species in this galaxy fights to survive. Humans fight to win, and survival is optional. That difference makes us more dangerous than any weapon system you'll ever study here. But why? Zara asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why choose such methods? Why develop doctrine based on acceptable annihilation? Because sometimes, Turner said quietly, the alternative is worse. The Vakari would have killed billions if they hadn't been stopped. 200 humans chose to die to prevent that outcome. We made that choice because we could, because our psychology allows us to value mission success above personal survival. And the Council restricts this, Vorin said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Not because you fail at warfare, but because you succeed too well. Because you've created military doctrine that treats your own lives as expendable resources. Exactly, Carter confirmed. The human limitation accord exists because the Council recognizes that humanity is capable of achieving military objectives that require genocidal casualty rates. We're restricted not to protect the galaxy from our incompetence, but to protect the galaxy from our competence when it's fully unleashed. The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence after the footage ended. This was the silence of minds recalibrating their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics. I need to ask, Trell said carefully, if humans are capable of this level of effectiveness, why do you accept the restrictions? You could reject them. You could demand full military participation. Turner smiled, though there was no humor in it. Because we choose to. That's the other thing you need to understand about humanity. We're capable of extreme violence, yes, but we're also capable of extreme restraint. We accept limitations on our power because we want to be part of civilization, not its destroyers. The restrictions only work because humans enforce them on ourselves. But that choice is voluntary, Kordax observed, which means humanity could change its mind at any time. Yes, Turner said simply. We could. The question is whether other species understand why we haven't, and why we hope we never need to. The weeks following the presentation transformed the Academy fundamentally. Turner's classes, once sparsely attended by bored students fulfilling requirements, became the most popular courses on campus. The library's human military history section, previously ignored, was now constantly occupied by students trying to understand the psychology behind tactics that seemed to violate every principle of self-preservation. Zara spent those weeks in a state of intellectual reconstruction. Everything she had believed about military science required re-examination. She had spent years studying warfare as an optimization problem, seeking mathematical solutions that minimized casualties while maximizing strategic gains. Human doctrine operated on entirely different principles, accepting catastrophic losses as necessary costs for mission completion. The terrifying part was recognizing how effective those principles were when applied correctly. She found Turner in his office one afternoon, reviewing lesson plans for the following semester. The scarred professor looked up as she entered, gesturing toward a chair with practiced hospitality. Professor, Zara began, her light patterns showing the uncertainty she felt. I need to understand something. The footage showed humans choosing terrible casualties to achieve victory, but you also choose to accept restrictions that limit your military power. Those seem contradictory. Turner considered the question carefully before responding. They're not contradictory, they're complementary. Humans understand we're capable of extreme actions when necessary, but we also understand that necessary is a judgment call, and our judgment has been wrong before. The restrictions exist partly because we recognize our own capacity for excess. You're afraid of yourselves, Zara said, understanding dawning. We're realistic about ourselves, Turner corrected. We know what happens when human military doctrine is applied without restraint. The Vakari learned. Other species during first contact learned. We learned from those experiences too, which is why we accepted the limitation accord. Zara processed this, her enhanced cognitive systems analyzing implications. So the restrictions represent human self-awareness about human danger. Partially. They also represent other species, fear about what we're capable of accomplishing when we decide something must be stopped. The Council recognized that humanity treats war differently than other civilizations. For most species, warfare is about achieving objectives while preserving their own forces. For humans, warfare is about achieving objectives regardless of what preservation costs. Which makes you more effective, Zara observed. And more dangerous, Turner added. Effectiveness without self-imposed limits becomes genocide. The restrictions help ensure humanity doesn't cross lines we can't uncross. Over the following weeks, similar conversations occurred throughout the academy. Students who had mocked human tactical thinking now studied it with fearful fascination. Vorin spent days running simulations, trying to model human decision-making during the Hadrian 6 operation. His enhanced processor kept returning error messages because the optimal solutions according to standard military mathematics would have resulted in mission failure. Human decisions that seemed irrational produced the only outcome that achieved complete success. It's like they operate on different mathematics, Vorin explained to a group of students gathered in the common area. Standard tactical doctrine treats soldier survival as a high-priority variable. Human doctrine treats it as a flexible parameter that can be sacrificed if mission requirements demand it. That flexibility allows tactical options that simply don't exist in conventional warfare. But at what cost? Another student asked. 98% casualties. Even in victory, that's catastrophic. For the individuals involved, yes, Vorin agreed. But from a species-level perspective, 200 soldiers eliminated a threat that had consumed 4 star systems. The exchange ratio isn't catastrophic, it's incredibly efficient. The realization spread through the student body like a slow-moving wave. Human warfare wasn't primitive or irrational. It was optimized for different priorities, priorities that allowed humans to achieve objectives that seemed impossible using conventional doctrine. Zara completely rewrote her thesis. The new version, titled The Psychology of Tactical Sacrifice, Understanding Human Military Doctrine, analyzed the cognitive frameworks that allowed humans to function effectively in combat situations where standard self-preservation instincts would guarantee failure. The paper received immediate attention from military theorists across 3 sectors. But the most significant change came in how students viewed the human limitation accord itself. What had seemed like evidence of human weakness was now understood as the most important peace treaty in galactic history. The restrictions weren't punishment for incompetence. They were voluntary restraints accepted by a species capable of committing calculated atrocities in pursuit of mission success. Dean Kordax called an assembly to address the petition that had started everything. The auditorium filled with students who now understood what they hadn't when signing their names to that document. The petition to remove human military studies from our curriculum has been formally withdrawn, Kordax announced. In its place, the petitioners have submitted a recommendation that human tactical doctrine be given greater emphasis in advanced strategic courses. He gestured toward Zara, who stood and addressed the assembly. "We were wrong," she said simply, her light patterns showing the sincerity behind the admission. "We believed human warfare was primitive because we didn't understand what it was optimized to accomplish. We measured it against standards that don't apply to combat situations where conventional tactics guarantee failure. Human military doctrine," she continued, "represents warfare conducted by a species that values mission success above individual survival. This makes them capable of achieving objectives that are impossible using conventional methods. It also makes them the most dangerous military force in known space." The assembly remained silent as Zara concluded her statement. Therefore, the human limitation accord must be maintained, not as punishment, but as protection. Protection for other species from human capabilities, and protection for humans from themselves. The restrictions only work because humanity enforces them voluntarily. We hope they continue to make that choice. Kordax nodded his approval. The Academy administration accepts this recommendation. Human military studies will be expanded, not reduced. All advanced students will be required to understand not just what humans are capable of accomplishing, but why they're capable of it and what it costs them. 6 months after the presentation, the Galactic Naval Academy had become a different institution. Students still came from 14 worlds, still studied tactics and strategy and military history. But now they understood that warfare wasn't merely mathematics and logistics. Sometimes it required understanding species who approached combat with fundamentally different priorities than self-preservation. Zara stood before the graduating class, delivering the valedictorian address. Her research had earned recognition across multiple sectors, but she spoke not about personal achievement, but about collective learning. "We came to this academy believing we understood warfare," she said, her light patterns visible even in the large auditorium. "We believed that superior technology and mathematical optimization would always defeat primitive tactics and emotional decision-making. The past months have taught us that we were dangerously wrong." She gestured toward Turner, who sat among the faculty watching the graduates with his characteristic calm expression. "Professor Turner and other human instructors have taught us that warfare isn't always about optimization. Sometimes it's about achieving impossible objectives by accepting impossible costs. Humans understand this in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. The human limitation accord," Zara continued, "exists because humanity is capable of military operations that require genocidal casualty rates. They can achieve objectives that seem impossible because they're willing to pay prices that seem unacceptable. This makes them both the most effective military force in the galaxy and the most dangerous." The graduates listened with the understanding that came from months of study. They had watched countless hours of declassified human combat operations. They had studied the psychology that allowed soldiers to use their own deaths as tactical weapons. They had run simulations proving that human methods, though seemingly irrational, produced outcomes that conventional tactics couldn't achieve. "We graduate today as the first class that truly understands what the restrictions mean," Zara concluded. "Not evidence of human weakness, but recognition of human strength turned into something other species cannot safely control. The accord holds because humans choose to honor it. Our responsibility is to understand why that choice matters and to hope they never stop making it." After the ceremony, Zara found Turner preparing to leave the academy. He had accepted a position with the Council's Strategic Advisory Board, one of the few roles available to human military personnel under the Limitation Accord. "Professor," Zara said, approaching him as he packed his office, "I have one final question. The footage showed humans achieving impossible victory through terrible sacrifice, but you personally chose to leave active service and accept restrictions on your capabilities." Turner finished packing a box of books before answering, "Because some victories aren't worth the price. Yes, humans can achieve military objectives that seem impossible. Yes, we can eliminate threats through tactics that other species can't comprehend. But those capabilities come with costs that go beyond casualty statistics." He looked at Zara directly, his grey eyes showing depths of experience she was only beginning to understand. "I saw what human warfare accomplishes. I also saw what it does to humans who conduct it. The soldiers at Hadrian 6 won a complete victory and saved billions of lives. But they paid a price that went beyond their own deaths. They paid in becoming people who could use their own suffering as weapons, who could coordinate their deaths with mathematical precision, who could smile while dying because they were completing the mission." "So you chose restraint," Zara said. "I chose to be something other than what war made me capable of becoming. That's the most human thing of all. We can be terrible beyond imagination when necessary, But we can also choose not to be terrible when it's not necessary. The restrictions exist because humans recognize that we need help making that distinction. Zara walked back across the academy grounds as the three suns set, painting the crystalline towers in shades of amber and gold. Around her, graduates celebrated and made plans for their future careers in galactic military service. They would carry with them understanding that previous generations had lacked, knowledge that would shape how they approached their responsibilities. The human limitation accord would hold because both sides understood what it represented. Other species knew humanity was capable of achieving military objectives through tactics that required catastrophic sacrifice. Humans knew they were capable of mistaking any threat for an existential one requiring total warfare. The restrictions protected everyone. They protected other species from human effectiveness. They protected humans from becoming what their worst capabilities might make them. And they worked only because humanity enforced them on themselves, choosing restraint despite having the power to reject it. Somewhere beyond the academy, in the vast darkness between stars, human patrol vessels maintained their vigil on the borders of civilization. They carried weapons they hoped never to use and accepted limitations they could break at any moment. They protected species that feared them and honored restrictions that only worked through voluntary compliance. The galaxy remained peaceful not because conflict was impossible, but because the most dangerous military force in known space chose not to exercise its full capabilities. That choice, renewed every day by every human serving under the limitation accord, represented the greatest tactical victory humanity had ever achieved. The victory of restraint over capability, of wisdom over power, of choosing to be civilization's reluctant guardians rather than its inevitable destroyers. Zara understood this now. Every graduate understood. They had seen what human warfare accomplished and what it cost. They had learned that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy weren't those who could destroy everything in their path, but those who could destroy everything and chose not to. That lesson would shape galactic military doctrine for generations to come, passed from instructor to student, from species to species, ensuring that no one would ever again mistake human restraint for human weakness. The restrictions would hold as long as humanity chose to honor them. And everyone hoped, with the desperate hope born of witnessing true horror, that humans would never choose otherwise.